Hello and welcome to tonight's event, an author talk with Eman Quotah. Eman is joining us tonight to discuss her debut novel, Bride of the Sea. Before we get started with tonight's event, just a quick note about the weather. We've had some thunderstorms this evening, so if one of us has a poor Wi-Fi signal or disconnects, please just bear with us. I have another staff member with us tonight, Kayla Payne, who will take over for me if we have some technical difficulties. I also wanted to make the note up top that there will be time for audience questions at the conclusion of tonight's event. So if you have any questions for Eman about her writing, her process, or Bride of the Sea, please feel free to put those in the chat box or the Q&A box at any time, and I will make sure to ask them at the end of the event. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's guest, Eman Quotah. Eman Quotah is the author of the novel Bride of the Sea. She grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Her writing has appeared in The Washington Post, USA Today, The Toast, The Establishment, Book Riot, Literary Hub, Electric Literature, and other publications. She currently lives with her family in Rockville, Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Eman Quotah.
Hey, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the Friends of Duncan Library for recommending your book to me as a debut local author. I read your book as an audiobook and really enjoyed it. I'll put some links in the chat box of where the audience can find your book as well. But I just wanted to jump right in and ask you a little bit. Do you have anything you'd like to preface the conversation with?
No, I'm really excited to be here and to be chatting with you guys. I love talking to readers.
Thank you. Your book, can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Sure. The book is about two Saudi students who come to the United States in the early 1970s to study. At the beginning of the book, their marriage is kind of on the rocks. They get divorced. They have a baby, they get divorced. And then the wife, Saida, is concerned that her child might be taken away from her because of the way that custody laws are set up in Saudi Arabia. And she wants to stay in the United States at the time. And even today, most Saudis come to the United States, to study or to work for a while, but they go back. There isn't really a large history of immigration like there is for other groups. So that's part of the context. And also part of the context is in the 60s and 70s, there were Saudi students like my dad who traveled overseas to study and then went back to take that knowledge with them to Saudi Arabia. After they get divorced, Saida disappears with the daughter Hanadi, who's later known as Hannah, and Munir, the father, is left to search for her for many years. So the book is about that, and then about the reunion and sort of the aftermath of the abduction.
What can you tell me about how you came up with this plot? I know that you, like Hanadi, Munir, and Saida, have lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and you also spent some time growing up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which features heavily as a place setting in the book. Did any of your life experiences inform your novel or your characters?
Yeah, like the answer is sort of yes and no. So the inspiration for the plot of the book came from another family. So my dad had a friend who went to the United States, a different part of the Midwest, to study. And after he and his wife were divorced, she and his daughter disappeared for many years, and he didn't find her until she was an adult. So I knew this story growing up. And then when I was a young adult, my mom told me that this man had found his daughter. And I just started thinking about, like, what would that be like? What would that be like to have grown up in one place and then your father, who you've never met and might even have thought abandoned you or had died or something, like comes back into your life, what would that be like? And so I thought about this idea for many years. I tried to write it. I wrote sort of a draft that I ended up, or not a full draft, but partial draft that I ended up abandoning later. And then there are the parts that are sort of set in places where I've lived. I think that in part because I was writing about an experience that was so different from mine, it was grounding to kind of use places that I knew. Saudi Arabia was always going to be part of the book. I suppose I could have said it somewhere else, but for me, that was just where part of it was going to be set, where she was going to go back. And I wanted her not only to be reunited with her father, but also to be reunited with that country and with the family. And I have a very large Saudi family. I grew up partially in Jeddah, where my dad is from, partially in the United States, where my mom is from, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. We would spend the school year in Saudi Arabia from the time I was 8 until I graduated from high school. And then we would summer in Cleveland, Ohio. So anyways, but in Saudi, I have a very large family that was a big part of my life while I was there. And so they are another kind of inspiration for the book. Especially when I was younger, Saudi families are very large and very connected. And of course, anybody from any culture who has a big family knows that there's like intrigue and secrets and people, favorites and people like having fights and stuff. And so that seemed like, a very interesting tapestry for a story that is about secrets and lies. And so that part of it is inspired by my experience. And then just, some of the places in Ohio and other places are places that I've been to. And it was really fun to bring those places to life. To I think in some ways for a writer, it's both easier and harder to write about the things that you're really familiar with, because you have that thing there that you can. It's like having the clay, but then sometimes you can also get kind of too hung up on what's real, and it's fun to just sort of set that aside and kind of create something whole cloth. So, for example, there's the town in California where Saida and Hannah spend some time is kind of based on places in Northern California that I spent time as a child, because that's where my mom's family is from. But it's a completely made up town, as opposed to, almost, I think all the other places in the book are real places.
Did you have a hippie tomato growing neighbors next to you?
No, but all my family in California are hippies and, and Mexican tomato growers and things like that. So, maybe not that hippie, but like my family has a property up in the sort of red dirt area of Northern California. And all of their neighbors were these sort of off the grid kind of people. And so I was a little inspired by people like that in creating the neighbors there. Yeah. Great question.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the mother figure in your book, Saida. I may have spent way too much time after finishing the book thinking about her and her motivations, and whether or not I thought she was a likable character or whether or not I thought she was justified in her actions. So I was just wondering, do you view Saida as a sympathetic character, or do you intend for the audience to like or dislike Saida as much as her daughter does at the end of the novel?
Yeah, she is like the most divisive character in the novel, I think. There are readers I've talked to who really like identify with her and sympathize with her, and others to them, she's like the villain of the novel. And I view her as the villain of the novel, but I don't necessarily view her as unlikable. I think that, we can all think of people in our lives who have done things to hurt other people, who have done things that are seem terrible to us. And yet they still have friends, yet we still may like them. You're the I don't know, the boyfriend who broke your friend's heart, is still got friends. Now this I think is worse than that, but and I think that part of what informed me was the experience of my dad's friend, who I knew was torn away from his daughter for so long, and that just seemed like an awful thing. Part of it also is research I did on parental abduction, and I think a real big misconception about parental abduction is that, or any kind of abduction by relatives, is that as long as children are with a relative, they're safe. And that's not necessarily the case. Parental abduction can be really traumatic for the child, for the other parent. It's often, a sign of really, it's a sign of really extreme conflict. It's not a normal thing that happens, in this society or other societies. And so to me, that was something that I could understand why Hannah might not forgive her for it. I think also that some readers expect, like in this society culture particularly, I feel like we expect forgiveness a lot, and in real life it doesn't always happen. And so I think that is part of why that part of the story is kind of divisive. And people have different feelings about it, which is great, which is fine. That for some people, that idea that there isn't that kind of closure and forgiveness at the end is not what they would want or expect, and for others it's like, yeah, that happens, I've experienced that, maybe. So I guess I think I would encourage people to think about characters not from the angle of, is this character likable or unlikable, but sort of the whole picture of the character and the things that they've done and the impact they've had on other people. I didn't want her to have no redeeming qualities, for sure. But I don't think, I know likability is a big debate among readers and writers. And I think sometimes readers and writers have different views on it. But of course, we want to be able to live with the characters in the book for a while. But I think there are other questions to ask in addition to likability about the characters. And anyways, I think it's great that she's really fascinating to a lot of people.
Well, speaking of other questions to ask about these characters, we do have an audience question that fits really well in this train of thought. Heather writes in, as a parent, I was struck by the way you explored the concept of losing a child and missing out on her entire childhood. The raw pain of that experience comes across so clearly. I wondered if you could elaborate a little about the pain in Saida's background that compelled her to make the choice she made.
I don't know. I don't know that it's I don't know the answer to that question. I feel like that's the mystery that that can never be solved in this book. And that it's the mystery that both Munir and Hannah will never know the answer to. And I think that, to me, Saida is rash. she also is the kind of person who just does things and doesn't like regret them. And so once she does take Hannah, there's kind of no going back. That's sort of how I thought of it. You know, some readers have seen in her some sort of maybe emotional or mental issues that she's dealing with that might have pushed her to this. And I can definitely see that in her. I didn't have a particular like diagnosis in mind or something, but just that she was unstable in some ways, and that's why she makes this choice that most people wouldn't make. So yeah, but I don't have a direct answer to that question though.
Well, we've talked a lot about Saida, the mother character. Let's talk a little bit more about Munir,
Sure.
Nadi's father. Munir's life in your book is heavily influenced by the geopolitical climate of the last 30 years. For example, he spends some time in Saudi Arabia during the first Gulf War. His son is later detained in America after 9/11. How did recent world history influence you as you approach this novel?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, you know, I started thinking about this book and writing that earlier version of it before 9/11. But, you know, even before 9/11, for Arab Americans and American Muslims, like, you know, political events often already, you know, affected how people viewed us as a group. And so, but I don't know if I went into writing the book originally with the idea that there was going to be that sort of geopolitical angle to it. You know, but then after 9/11, it was like that was sort of the lens through which we were viewed, right? And whether people view us positively or negatively, it was there. And so and as I sort of stretched the story to span all those decades, it seemed like I would have to show, you know, you couldn't show Arab Americans without showing somehow the impact of 9/11. But I didn't want it to be like what happened right after. So I read the book Patriot Acts, which is, I'm going to forget her last name, by Alia Malik. It is a great oral history of the impact of the Patriot Act and the War on Terror on Arab Americans and American Muslims after 9/11. I also, you know, I lived through the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in Jeddah. I lived there at the time. I was a senior in high school. I remember that I wanted to write my, one of my college essays was supposed to be about some sort of political issue. And I was going to write about, you know, my views on the war. And I had a friend of my mom's who was American living in Jeddah who helped me with my essay. And, you know, she was, I was sort of arguing kind of against it. And she was like, well, think about, you know, she came from a small town in the States where, you know, the impact of, you know, if there was a disruption to oil, it would impact her town. And she wanted me to think about it from, you know, different sides. And I just didn't write, you know, I just ended up not writing the essay. And, but I think that, you know, fiction gave me a place where I could kind of write about these issues. And, you know, while I was a senior in high school, I don't remember specific events, but I remember hearing about certain writers or columnists in Saudi who were either blacklisted or, you know, fired or jailed. At least, you know, a couple of people, one or two people at the time. And then there was also the women's driving protests that happened. And that was really, that really impressed itself on me at the time, that they had the courage to do that. So, I mean, all of those things kind of went into the book. And I also kind of, wanted to have those parallel things between Saudi Arabia and the United States, to kind of show the almost, the universality of oppression. And after 9/11, you did hear about these young Arab men who were detained for no reason. And Ali Malik's book talks about like just the range of things from, being kicked off an airplane to, secret black ops sites where people were held. So obviously there was a big range of things that happened to people. But anyway, so all of that kind of influenced me to some extent. And I think also because I made Munir a journalist, it made sense for those certain events like that to have an
impact. All right. So you talked a little bit about comparing American culture to Saudi Arabian culture and wanting to show the universality of oppression. Let's talk a little bit more about Hanadi's experiences in both places and your experiences in both places. In the book, Hanadi experiences growing up as a typical secular American kid, and that's contrasted with her experiences visiting her typical religious Saudi extended family. Are there certain aspects of Saudi culture that you wanted to include in this book? What are some things about Saudi culture that you would want your average audience member, average reader to know about?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing to start is that a lot of Americans are secular, but many Americans are religious. In fact, we have a quite religious society compared to some other Western societies. And Saudi Arabia is a culture where that is very influenced by religion. And it was very much a part of everyday life. But not everyone, I think, in their personal, relationship with God has the same level of religiosity. It's just that I think, in America, sometimes I feel like depending on where you live, it's almost taboo to be too religious. In some places, it's the opposite, right? Depending on what part of the country you live in. And in Saudi, it's kind of the opposite. It's a little bit more taboo to be more secular and less religious. But there definitely are people at different places on the spectrum. Yeah, but I think, like because Islam is not the dominant religion here, and because Hannah's mom was hiding and she doesn't experience it. So when she goes over there, she is sort of like, I mean, in many ways, she's a fish out of water. And she experiences her father's and especially her stepmother's religiosity and faith. And that was a time actually right around the Gulf War, like the first Intifada leading into the Gulf War, was a time when there was sort of a wave of conservatism in the Middle East. And, I experienced watching like some people I knew, including one of my aunts, becoming more religious during that time. More women started covering their faces, even in Jeddah, which is relatively more liberal than some other parts of the country. And so the sort of the stepmother is kind of a little bit typical of some women of that time, kind of embracing religion more. Some of the things that I wanted to show about Saudi society were like just how family oriented it is. the way that the family embraces Hannah, despite the fact that she doesn't speak the language and hasn't experienced the culture before, that just sort of all embracing, attitude. I think, I wanted to kind of show what it was like, when I was a teenager. Like, we had drivers. My friends and I couldn't drive ourselves anywhere. So the stuff where Hannah is with, oh, I'm blanking on her name, the friend, that is sort of ripped from some parts of my adolescence, and then also things that I didn't do my friends doing. So, the wedding was really fun to write. Weddings are a huge deal. They're a huge deal here too, but they're huge, they're bigger. And you could, we would get invited, my mom and I would get invited to weddings where we didn't really know anybody, and we'd just show up, so that was fun to write, and it was something I kind of wanted to show. I think, I don't know how much this comes across, but Jeddah is a really beautiful city. It's the bride of the sea. That's where the book's name comes from. It's on the Red Sea. It's gorgeous. And I kind of wanted some of my love for that city and that place to come out, and I hope it does. Yeah. So that's another thing that I really wanted to get across. And finally, I think on this question, as a woman writer, I think that a lot of times I feel like people expect me to, I feel expected to write about women, to write about women's issues, to write about women's oppression. And I feel that the image of Arab men is so terrible. But in my life, there was, my dad, my uncles, and my brothers, and my cousins, and my dad's friends, and all of these guys that I kind of wanted to portray, Arab Saudi men as real people, and not in a sort of, oh, I've got to humanize them way, but just because that's my truth, and I, that's, if I'm going to draw, inspiration for my fiction from the real people in my life, that's where it comes from.
I certainly think the beauty of Jeddah does come through in your writing, and I think you do an excellent job. Especially, there are a lot of really great, well-developed male Saudi characters in the novel, so I think you really achieve those goals. I have another audience question I'd like to throw your way. This is about another male character in your book.
Sure.
This time he's American, and I must say, when I read this question, I'm just like, wait, what? Where was Michael in the background? But I keep forgetting your main character. I keep calling her Hanadi in my head. So when I hear Hannah, I just perk up.
Yeah, Hannah.
Heather writes, one of my favorite characters in your book was Hannah's husband, even though he's such a minor character.
Oh, okay.
He seemed like he was her happy ending, and I really liked how he was trying to build bridges between her and her mom. Did you frame his character intentionally as such a good guy to show hope for the future, fixing the mistakes of the previous generation, or am I just reading way too much into it?
I mean, I think that's a good interpretation. I don't know if that's what I was thinking. I think I felt like she deserved to end up with a good guy. And I felt like, yeah, she needed, I mean, because her reaction to her mom is so strong, there needed to kind of be a foil. And he didn't experience what she experienced, so he can afford to be more conciliatory. And he is a person, I think, who values family, and but he's not going to push her too much either. So yeah, that's a great interpretation. When I'm creating characters, like, I guess I don't and the themes too, like I think about the themes, and there are certain things that I want to get across. And but sometimes there are things that readers bring out that like I haven't really seen. And I like that idea that he's sort of her hope for the future. He's her kind of different path. When people who have like, I mean, I wasn't thinking about this when I wrote the book, but people who come from broken families or something, and their relationships with their spouses seem so strong, and it seems like part of it is because they want to create something, or they're driven to create the kind of family that they didn't have. So that could be it. But yeah.
Well, let's talk more about your process. At
Sure.
a lot of my author talks, aspiring writers like to hear a little bit about the author's process. How did you get started in writing? I know that you write articles for various publications like the Washington Post. How is writing a novel different than writing one of your shorter pieces?
Yeah, well, first of all, it takes a lot longer, which is obvious. But I've wanted to be a writer since I was like at least in the first grade. And I wrote poems when I was little. I write stories. My first publication ever was a story I wrote for a Girl Scout patch called the life of a raindrop. And I did little illustrations of anthropomorphized raindrops, and sent it to a kids magazine, and it got published. So I don't know, I was like 10 or something. And then in college I wrote poetry, and then I started writing stories. And I actually had the honor, so I might not think this, but the honor of being taught by Jonathan Franzen when I was in college. That was my first short story class ever. But I really wanted to write novels because that's what I love to read. I love reading other types of things too, poetry and memoir and essays, but I really wanted to write a novel. So this idea was the first one that I think that I ever started, and it was just hard. Like I couldn't quite wrap my head around how to write it. And so then I like put it aside and I wrote another manuscript, which is the manuscript that got me my agent. And we weren't able to sell that book. And meanwhile, I picked this one up again and wrote it. I think when I started writing novels, I stopped writing short stories. I stopped writing poems because it just takes every ounce of energy, every free moment you have to write a novel, And I know there are novelists who write a bunch of other things on the side, and I do sometimes dabble in other things, but usually if I write a short story, it's because I'm like, waiting to hear about a novel, or, I write an essay when I have some time, so for me, the novel is like you drop everything else in order to do it. And you drop everything else for like 5 years, um, but it's just writing long form and it's just like it just you just have to keep working on it. And I think that for me, what got me to finally finish something was to be like, okay, I have to, if I write a certain amount, then I'm committed and I can't go back. Like you write 50 pages or whatever, and you're in it, and even if you're going to go back and rewrite a lot of that, like you just keep moving forward. You have to just keep moving forward. One of the best pieces of writing advice I ever got that I didn't recognize as good writing advice at the time was at the Writers Center in Bethesda. I took a class from Richard Peabody, who's well known in this area, and I was working on that early version of this book, and he was like, "Okay, like you got the characters, now write it," and I didn't listen to him because I didn't really know how to do it. And another thing that a writing teacher told me that sticks with me is when you're writing your first novel, you're learning how to write a book at the same time that you're learning how to write this book. So it's even harder. And once you have, I mean, even though I had written a manuscript before this one, this was the one I started first, and I was just so hard. So once I had finished that other manuscript, I think it was a little bit easier going to that one. And now I'm working on the next one. And I think that even though it's still hard and I'm still writing things that are going to, get chucked, I feel like, oh, I can do it. I've done this before. And you do just need to write it. You just need to keep moving forward. Writing goals, I think, work really well. And so when you're first starting out, I think it's figuring out what should the goals be. And I think the first time I realized like I had to do that was I went on a writing residency in a remote part of Washington State many years ago. And I got there and it was 30 days. And on the first full day I was there, I was like, holy moly, what have I done? Here I am with all of this time. And, and I had written some of the book I was working on, but not that much. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I just, I had a certain amount of pages I wanted to write by the end of the month. But then it was like, how many words can I write in a day? And then creating a routine, and and that was great. Of course, in most people's normal life, you don't have that big span of time ahead of you. What you have are little chunks of time, right? And so I create goals for myself. I'm gonna, do XYZ on the manuscript, this revision, or writing new pages or whatever by, this part of the year. And then you have to be flexible with yourself and, regroup and rethink your goals when you need to. But that's the best way to do it because it's a really long game. Writing is a lifelong thing, and you have to kind of pace yourself. So
I must say, I am dying to know how the original draft of Bride of the Sea is different than what you wound up publishing. Is there anything you can share from your first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can talk about, there's lots of different iterations of the draft. When I was writing the very, very first version of it, I was really most focused on that reunion between Munir and Hannah. And I also, there's an epigraph at the beginning of the book that is from the Holy Quran. And the story of Joseph, I don't know if people really know it, but the story of Joseph really guided me. And it guided me even more in the beginning, that I kind of wove in sort of a retelling of that story. What happens is, he is a dream teller. He's very gifted. He has half siblings, and they're jealous of him and how beloved he is with their father. And so they abduct him and they throw him in a well, and they were going to kill him, but they decide to that they kill a sheep instead or something. And they put the blood on his shirt and give it to their father, and their father becomes blind. That story is partially in in the book, a little bit of it. So that I was really thinking about that. And then when I started from scratch, I started thinking of the timeline differently. So, like there's the reunion, there's the abduction, there's Munir and Saida meeting, and then there's all the stuff that happens. Like once there's a reunion, like that's not the end of your life, right? More stuff happens. And so I went back further, and an early draft of that second version of the book was written from many different points of view. I wanted to show the repercussions. And so like there was a chapter from the point of view of the grandmother and a chapter from the point of the view of this stepmother. There was a chapter from the point of view of Jamil. And then, the feedback my agent and I got was that was too much. And I revised it to focus in more on those three main characters. But I think that the good thing about it taking so long to write was that I matured, the world changed, there was so much more to write about, and I became a parent, and I became able to sort of look at it not just from the point of view of the daughter, but also from the point of view of a parent. And then, the advantage of having written from all those different points of view was that then when I went to, revise and edit the book, it became, I knew all those characters, I had all those layers. So I felt like I could sort of have stories within stories, even keeping it within just those 3 points of view. So I think that gives sort of a richness and texture to the book that might not have been there otherwise. Another thing that changed when we sold the book was that my editor suggested cutting the last 25 pages of the book. And that's how we got to the ending that we have now. And it was the kind of thing where it was like, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that, And I think that was a way to sort of contain the story more, by ending with her back with her dad again. And yeah, so many changes happened over the course of writing the book, and I think that's true for many books.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Heather wants to know about the other book, the one that you wrote, to find your literary agent. She'd like to know, now that Bride of the Sea has been published, do you think there's any chance that the other novel you wrote will also see the bookshelf someday?
I don't know. Publishing is so difficult. Publishing is so not difficult. It is, but it's hard to predict things. So I last summer I did sort of a rewrite of that one, and we put it on submission again. My agent and I. But I'm crossing fingers, but I don't know what is going to happen with that one. And that's something, that I've learned along the way, is that you have to, like, as a writer, set goals for the things that you can control, and try to, it's hard to deal with all the rejection and stuff, but you do have to realize that there are things that are out of your control. So I can control revising a book. I can control deciding if I'm gonna, keep on having my agent submit it or not. But I can't control whether someone loves it or not, like whether someone wants to buy it or not. So that one is about, it's a historical novel set in 13th century Baghdad. And even though it's gone through a lot of ups and downs, I've stuck with it because I really love the story. So we'll see. But I'm also working on a new manuscript that I'm calling an Arab American Hollywood novel, because I'm not ready quite yet to share exactly what it's about, but it's been really fun. I've been doing historical research for that, and having a lot of fun, figuring out how to write about celebrity and image and acting. And so
we have one more audience question. This one is from Patty. Patty specifically wants to know how your Saudi relatives reacted to Bride of the Sea, but I'd like to know how all of your relatives reacted to Bride of the Sea.
Well, I think a lot of my Saudi relatives haven't read it. It's not available there yet. You can get it like through, my dad ordered it through Amazon and got a physical copy of the book from Amazon. And I think some people have been able to get the Kindle book. And my mom has like physically lugged like 10 copies over with her. But I don't think a lot of my relatives there have read it, but they hopefully will be able to. It's being published in Arabic soon by a Lebanese publisher. I'm not sure if they'll distribute it in Saudi, but I hope they'll be able to. My mom loved it. So you asked about Hannah, you asked about all my relatives. My California relatives said they loved it.
They identified with the neighbors.
Yeah, probably.
So I went ahead and I put a link in the chat box to where audience members can check out the book from the Alexandria Library, and where they can find you on your website, emanquotah.com. You mentioned briefly that you have another book in the works. Where can with that project or with your next project, where can audience members find more of your work?
Well, if you go to my website, I have all my essays and short stories listed there. If you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, or for those who know me, Facebook, I regularly post about new things. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to the audience for spending your Wednesday evening with you.
Thanks for coming.
Our next author event is going to be on Monday, June 7th. Dr. Peter Wallenstein will join us in conversation to discuss his works and the landmark civil rights case, Loving versus Virginia. So come celebrate Pride Month by looking at marriage equality through the lens of social justice and historical court cases. So thank you so much, Eman, and thank you, Kayla, for being here in case anything went wrong. I'm glad it didn't, and thanks,
guys.
Do you have any final words for our audience, Eman?
No, that's it. Unless there's someone who has like a final like writing process question they want to ask, or publishing question. Maybe not.
I'm not seeing any.
All right.
Thank you, and thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
You too. Bye.